each side has left a number of traps that could allow them to walk away. For Iran's side, it's put in the provisions about Lebanon, which means that the White House would have to get Israel to stop firing at Hezbollah, even if Hezbollah fires back, and also to withdraw from southern Lebanon, which of course Israeli officials have said they're not going to do. And let's remember that the Hezbollah leadership is largely run right now by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. After Israel took out Hassan Nasrallah, their leadership is weakened. So Iran essentially can get Hezbollah to attack the south at any time and trigger some sort of fallout. For the U.S. part, the trap that they've left in there is that Iran has to agree to all of these various nuclear issues, many of which it's never agreed to before, or the U.S. can walk away. So this is really about paying Iran off to open the Strait of Hormuz.
I think what's also interesting is the lesson that Iran would have learned from the past few months, because on February 27th, the Iranians were negotiating with the United States through mediators, and they essentially thought that they would be back on Monday to continue negotiations. And the following day, the Ayatollah was dead, and they were then engulfed in a war, in a several-month war with the United States. And so I think what is worrying for a lot of people is that the irony is that after this is all over, the lesson that Iran would have learned is that they need to invest more in protecting themselves, more in missiles, probably more in nuclear development. How concerned are you about that? The fact that they have this money up front, a lot of Israelis are concerned that it's simply going to go towards arming proxies, Hezbollah, Houthis, rebels, going towards sort of missile development, nuclear development. Just walk us through that side of it, because there is concern that Iran would have learned the wrong lesson from the past few months.
Absolutely. Essentially, the U.S. has given them both the will and the way. In the initial Israeli strikes, many of the so-called moderates in the Iranian regime were taken out. And that includes the Ayatollah, who had worried about triggering some sort of U.S. attack by building a nuclear weapon. So he had always nixed proposals by the IRGC to move ahead with the nuclear bomb, according to U.S. intelligence. Now you've got the hardline survivors in charge, and they can see that, for instance, only by seizing the Strait of Hormuz did they beat off U.S. attacks. How much more strong a position would they be in if they had nuclear weapons? And as for the money they're about to get, they're getting access to their frozen funds, according to this deal, and that's about $24 billion, as reported. But previously, the U.S. has put strings attached saying you can access this money, but it can only go to non-sanctioned entities. There's no such language in this MOU. That means they could spend it on rebuilding a drone plant, rebuilding ballistic missile launchers. We don't know, and that's the problem with not having experts looking over every line of the draft.
So, Kim, the president says that he can rip this up, walk away whenever he chooses if they don't comply. And we've heard from the vice president repeatedly saying that they won't have access to any of this funding if they don't comply with the terms that they've agreed to as well and change their ways. This is also vague. This is what many view as an even harder line, hardline regime at this point. What is the likelihood that they will now change their ways?
You know, Iran would have to all but blow up a nuclear weapon, conduct a test, I think, to get Trump back in the position where he wants to fire at Iran. It is costly to keep all those naval vessels, all those aircraft in the region on war footing, billions of dollars a week. Trump also has other military targets in mind. His own officials have talked about stepping up and possibly conducting some sort of military action against Cuba in addition to the ongoing blockade. So he has other things that he might see as things he could accomplish ahead of the midterms, things that would make him look good for his legacy. This MOU and how vague it is and how much it's given Iran, it signals to us that basically he wants to wash his hands of this and walk away.
But Kim, I mean, that's going to be easier said than done.
Yeah.
A lot because of the issue with Lebanon. That's going to be a thorny issue between these two sides, especially as Netanyahu remains in a very, very tight position domestically on that front. Also, another lesson that the Iranians would have learned, I imagine, is that don't assume negotiations mean safety. There's been a few times over the past few months that we've seen negotiations ongoing while the United States perhaps would have bombed Iran, for example. And just so, given the atmosphere of distrust in all of this, and given what is happening with Lebanon right now, what is your anticipation that this war actually does end up coming to an end?
Yeah, Israel is the real hot point in this. The Israeli Prime Minister gave a press conference yesterday in Hebrew where he was very defensive. He angrily responded to a question about, are you taking orders from Donald Trump, saying, in Israel, everyone thinks Trump's controlling me. In the U.S., everyone thinks I'm controlling Trump. That's not true. But he reiterated over and over that he would not leave challenges unanswered. And, if you were an Israeli sitting in northern Israel and Hezbollah is sending rockets in your direction, you want your prime minister to fight back. So that is a reality that, Trump, that Bibi, especially Bibi Netanyahu, as he's facing an election this year, he is more likely to step up attacks, not decrease them. Iran knows that. That's why that's just one of many reasons I doubt we'll ever see an actual Iran nuclear deal signed by the Trump administration with Tehran.
If you go back to April, the president announced a ceasefire and the Strait of Hormuz would open. Today, they announced a ceasefire and the Strait of Hormuz will open with very significant concessions to the Iranians, such as waiving all oil, petrochemical, banking sanctions, the kind of stuff Iran has always wanted. It really returns to they can trade their oil at market prices, which has not been the case really since the Iran nuclear deal. Now, I will say one thing. I mean, there's a provision in the deal that Iran's nuclear program has to remain at status quo. And because of the military operation last year, a year ago at this time, which I think was more limited and obviously far more effective than this most recent campaign, Iran's nuclear program is pretty much knocked out. They're not enriching uranium. So you could say this kind of locks that in place. Mm-hmm. But the incentives you would want for a broader negotiation to really manage this issue long term, we've kind of given a lot of that away. So I'm skeptical that we can get there in these 60 days. I know the White House is saying there's some gentlemen's agreements with Iranian officials. I hope that can be true. In my experience with the Iranians, what is put on paper is really what matters. And we'll see what comes of these talks. But right now, to your question, if you just add up the puts and takes of this document, Iran is getting a lot, and all they're committing to is not to fire at ships in the Strait of Hormuz for 60 days.
All right, everyone. I just want a report that's making some pretty bold claims about Donald Trump, Iran, and a new agreement that's causing a lot of debate online. According to the report, Iranian officials are publicly celebrating what they describe as a major diplomatic victory. They're claiming that through negotiations, they achieved far more than they ever could have through military conflict. That's a huge statement, and it's one that's already getting a lot of attention. Yeah, one of the biggest points discussed in the video, as in the future of the Strait of Hormuz, Iranian officials argue that their position in the region has become stronger. And they suggest that his agreement could give them greater influence over maritime operations in the future. If that's true, it could have significant implications for global trade and energy markets. On the other hand, supporters of the agreement argue that it helped avoid a larger conflict and prevented further instability in the region. Critics, however, say that the United States may have given up so much during the negotiations. What really stood out to me was how differently both sides are presenting the outcome. Iran is calling it a victory, while Trump and his allies are defending it as a necessary move to protect economic interests and avoid a prolonged crisis. The video also highlights some of Trump's past comments about energy independence and compares them to his more recent statements. critics say there is a contradiction there, while supporters argue that changing circumstances require different decisions. At the end of the day, I think it's important to separate politically messaging from reality in international politics. Both sides overclaim victory, and the true impact usually isn't clear until months or even years later. But what do you think? Is this really a major win for Iran? Or was it probably best possible outcome for the United States under the circumstances? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe for more political news and analysis.